All right, so I'm going to introduce our panel of experts who are covering our 6 areas of trauma. Okay, so Barbara Largent, whom you've all heard, she's representing physical. Take this off. As we heard in her intro, Barb was a family physician for over 6 years. She worked in child abuse assessment for 8 years. She is a survivor of abuse and now does deep emotional release work with people using mind, body, energy medicine. Barb believes in the body's innate ability to heal itself. Our next person is Sierra Groenwald. Is that correct? Sierra is a licensed professional counselor and works as a behavioral health provider in a federally qualified health center, providing integrative care in a primary care home. She has over 14 years of experience in the mental health field in several areas. She is passionate about working with the community partners and is invested in opportunities to share her knowledge through public speaking, providing trainings, and directly helping individuals and families heal from their traumas as a trauma-informed care trainer through Trauma-Informed Oregon. Sierra believes that each person has the ability to overcome and learn the necessary skills in order to live a rewarding and happy life. Miss Elizabeth Bouvier Fitzgerald is representing Emotional. Elizabeth is a licensed clinician, who received a dual master's from Lesley University in expressive psychotherapy and clinical mental health. She's worked for Deschutes County Health Services for over 6 years as the clinical supervisor, their school-based mental health program, and is currently co-leading their implementation of the sanctuary model. She's written a book, survived a bunch of traumas, but she can't parallel park or do algebra. And Mr. Hank Queen, representing Spiritual. Hank is a retired executive from Boeing with 30 years of leadership, teaching, and consulting experience. After being diagnosed with congestive heart failure, he left Boeing to explore self-healing approaches. He learned all about the healing powers of the heart and that his heart disease was rooted in childhood trauma. He had 3 near-death experiences at key points in his life, and Hank now focuses on guiding, healing, and awakening clients. He acts as a guide and helper, assisting each person to find their own unique integration and opening of true self. Mr. Billy Lutz, he is representing Nutritional. Billy has a master's of human nutrition and functional medicine and is a certified personal trainer. He uses functional medicine to help his clients, which combines medical, nutritional, emotional, and spiritual practices or treatments that focus on optimizing functioning of the body and its organs, usually involving systems of holistic or alternative medicine. Billy believes you have to be your own advocate in the pursuit of getting the right help you need and recommends people take an empowering approach to healing the traumas in their life. And last but not least, Miss Katie McClure is representing Social. Katie McClure serves as director of Trace's Partnership, which stands for Trauma, Resilience, and Adverse Childhood Experiences, a movement to bring awareness to how trauma experienced in childhood can affect our lives long term. In this role, she supports the efforts of communities to raise awareness, share knowledge, support, and train providers, strengthen networks, advance policies, and practices that nurture resilience. Please welcome all of our experts.
Okay, I guess we'll just go down the line with this individually. Would you explain how trauma presents itself as it relates to the area that you're representing? Barb, you want to start?
I actually find it kind of funny that I'm doing physical because I really do a lot of emotional work with people, but in the physical body. And I see trauma show up in a lot. This hasn't been I guess Western medicine, studied, but that it's in the fascia. A lot of the times the trauma, the emotional chemicals that we don't digest get stuck in the fascia of the body, right? The connective tissues of the body, and those of us who work with the body will know this. It's in the joints, right? It's in the muscles, it's in these spaces. And so what happens physically is it will start to have places that are just uncomfortable or hurt, and we often will think that there's something, we look for something physically wrong, literally on x-ray or whatnot, but we don't find anything. But that doesn't mean nothing's there. What's there is an emotion that's undigested, right? Toxic chemicals, emotions in the body. And so then you can have aches and pains. They can come up in joint aches, right? Headaches, stomach, a lot of stomach issues, right? Lots of stuff that we put in our gut, lots and lots of stuff when we push down into our gut. Like cookies, yeah, cookies are, right. That'll go to the nutritional, right? That's when you're not doing the good nutrition for your body by feeding your body cookies. But there's a lot that we do just by where we're not dealing with it, but we'll pack that somewhere, and it will start to have an effect on the body, and will show up in different aches, right? Even if it's a place where sometimes I'll be clearing people in their ears because of everything they heard, right? Even if they didn't experience possibly abuse directly to them, but hearing other people yell at each other, right? It comes in here, and then they'll have a lot of pain and discomfort here, TMJ, right? Ear pain, trouble hearing, those kind of things will happen. So any area that you jammed it into, it can start to be uncomfortable or cause pain.
Also illnesses and disease.
Yep. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All kinds of different things. Because one, it puts down your immune system. And so we're not going to be able to clear things as easily. You know, our immune system, especially with our immune system, additionally, when we say things to ourselves that are negative, right? A lot of the things that we hear, in fact, when we are going through any kind of trauma, we often, that slowed down space when like if you were in a car wreck or something and it gets all slowed down and weird, right? That like time gets warpy. That's a theta state or a brainwave state that's in theta, like which little kids are in from 0 to 7, theta state, that sort of in-between state, not dream state, but not like in our normal awake state, because when in a theta state, when kids are little, they can, anything's possible, right? You put on a towel, you are Superman, right? It's true, right? And as you're little, Santa is true, right? You believe it. And so in a theta state, when you're in that theta state, whatever is said to you at that time comes in as truth. So if it was told to you or you heard, you're so stupid because something came in at that point, that will come into your body. Then you start to believe that. I'm so stupid. So the body will respond in the immune system by attacking itself, right? The autoimmune system will attack itself. And it will start to be like, if I'm so stupid or whatever, we'll still do that. It also is the immune system not functioning at its highest level, so you're much more likely to get ill in all kinds of ways. And I feel like trauma actually is the basis of most all things that we are dealing with. Many, many, many of the illnesses we are dealing with are going to have some kind of trauma base.
Thank you. Ciara?
From a mental health perspective, I think trauma shows up in a lot of different ways, oftentimes depression, anxiety, PTSD, acute stress and trauma-related disorders. I think oftentimes we know that trauma affects the neurobiology of our brain and our regulatory system, so oftentimes we're going to have, from a cognitive perspective, oftentimes people adopt a lot of negative belief systems, a lot of cognitive errors, oftentimes excessive, inappropriate guilt, a lot of shame that they hold from the trauma. Numbing, I think when we talk about it from a regulatory system, oftentimes people can either feel really overwhelmed and feel too much, or feel too little and feel numb. So you can go either way. What that looks like. What that looks like from a hyperarousal standpoint, when you're feeling too much, oftentimes feeling that hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, really anxious, kind of that can't get out of your body feeling, really a lot of nervousness, or the opposite, kind of that numbing, depressed, shut down, isolated, things like that. That can come in a lot of different things, especially when we're looking at mental health. Oftentimes people can have trauma-induced hallucinations, a lot of delusions, excessive worry, intrusive thoughts, intrusive memories, flashbacks, nightmares, and as we talk about on this panel, it'll affect everything from physical, mental health, social health, and then people will, as the panelists talked about before, is deal with it try to deal with in a lot of different ways, oftentimes with substance use, avoidance behaviors, numbing out, overdoing, and a lot of different things.
Thank you. Elizabeth? And can you just hold the mic close? So
Hold the mic close.
it's easier to
Okay.
hear.
So, and I think it's interesting too, because there's just going to be, and we knew this would happen, but so much crossover across each of the domains, because we are human beings and we are a holistic network, right? So of mind, body, spirit. And Barb, I love what you said about the ears. I had literally never thought of that before. And when I was little, I actually had to have my ears flushed and had like just weird stuff going on with it. And I had just now, I'm like, oh my gosh, literally never thought that that could potentially be a reason why. So look how we're all going to have aha moments all day long. We're still learning. So yeah, emotions and trauma. I like to say that I got a lot of D's and one A when it came to feelings. My 1A was anxiety. I was very good at that, having lots of it. And then the D's were depersonalization, derealization, detachment, dissociation, depression. So yeah, I think one of the ways that we can cope is by actually leaving our emotional state and getting away from our feelings. And so I was talking to someone this morning about, that we didn't get to recognize our feelings as a function of survival, that it was easier, as some of us have talked about this morning too, to just keep working, to just keep going, to just keep doing, rather than, and our culture fully supports this, rather than actually stopping to feel our feelings. So when we've been traumatized early on and there was no acknowledgement of it, that no one said, hey, this was a wrong thing that happened to you, we don't know how to feel about it. So the safest thing to do sometimes is feel nothing. And then that can show up as feeling too much or too little about other experiences that we end up having in our adult lives. And so we either overreact to things or underreact to things because we don't know what is appropriate. No one's ever shown us that. And so reclaiming a sense of emotional health really requires safe community, having people that we can trust, and then cultivating over time that trust with ourselves to really begin to even recognize, what am I feeling right now? How am I feeling? And like I said, our world doesn't really give us the space or the pause to do that, so that becomes part of our healing work. So yeah.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hank?
So I was asked to talk about spirituality, and I have that same issue, not an issue, but we're holistic. And some people have their own definitions of spirituality. So before I even do that, I just want to explain something about the nature of trauma that's very, very basic. That when you're traumatized, you form deep beliefs. And those deep beliefs are about yourself and they're about the world around you. And the deep belief about the world around you is that the world is not safe. And that from that lack of safety comes control issues and behaviors, and also fear-based issues and behaviors. And the deepest internal belief is I'm not lovable and I'm not worthy. People internalize trauma somehow that it's themselves that are responsible for it. And from those come a lot of behaviors around compulsively seeking worthiness and love from other people, even at the cost of giving yourself up in that process. So nature is very disconnecting in that way because it pulls you in two different directions. And so most people go through love and they are unbalanced in the way they make their choices. It's unbalancing. So the two primary paths are fear and love. And when you've received a lot of trauma, almost compulsively you'll choose the path of fear. And the fear can be, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy, so you will engage in activities, even if you do what people classically call spiritual things or religious things. You're trying to make the world safe in that belief, of that spiritual way or that spiritual path, or you're trying to make yourself receive love or worthiness through that spiritual path. So it can lead to obsessive behaviors around religion or spirituality. it often leads people to choose an aspect of that which does not scare them, like the light. When actually a lot of this work you have to do inside yourself, and it's the dark areas in the basement that you need to visit. So it affects your life in terms of your physical form. So the work I teach is that the four realms, there's heart, body, mind, and soul, where you can think of your emotions, your physical aspects, your mental and your spiritual. But it drives, changes, and disconnects you in all four realms. And that's really where the fracture occurs. So the whole path of recovery and healing is trying to reconnect those parts of yourself to yourself. And from that place, you can be balanced and whole, and you can choose loving. You can choose it without any fear at that point.
Thank you. Go ahead and clap. It's okay. Billy?
Yeah, I don't know how I'm going to follow up after that one, but so as far as the nutritional imbalances go, like everybody said here, it's so interconnected that I truly don't think that you can have one without like virtually all of them going on it almost at the same time. They're just with different variations of volume. So trying to speak from the nutritional standpoint, I mean, if we're talking simply basic nutrition, nutrition is kind of like the fundamental building blocks for your entire life. So however you choose to basically create your concrete of your body by your choices that you make every single day, it's so intermingled with thoughts, because these two things are the single most impactful and consistent things that we do on a daily basis. So having the congruency throughout that in your life is super, super impactful. So you need to definitely make sure that when you're, choosing what you eat, you're conscious of that thought. And we'll go into that later, but that's a huge imbalance that we have, the toxins that we have in our food, as well as from just a internal standpoint. All these traumas can create gut issues that can imbalance our health. Even if you're eating the right foods, then we may not be assimilating the right nutrients to be able to create this concrete. So it's such an intermingled web of imbalance that could create from this. And I always want to take it back to the toxins. I mean, our society is just so toxic in everything that we touch. So just being conscious of the fact that what's the food I eat, what are the thoughts I think, what are the water that I'm drinking, where am I breathing, right? Do I live in a city? Do I need to have an air purification system in my house because I'm living close to a highway that gives off a lot of gas that can create upper neck cancers, right? So it's just being conscious of the choices that we make that are super impactful, and what we bump into is in my opinion, super, super helpful in helping you heal and become conscious.
Great. Thank you,
Yeah.
Billy. Katie?
Thanks. So, I started my career in, I have an MBA, and I spent a whole career in healthcare administration. And my last job there, before I switched gears entirely, was trying to figure out how do we keep people healthy so we can provide less care, so we can charge less, which is kind of a magical role in healthcare. It doesn't exist in most systems, but it also kind of ruined me for life, and in a really good way, that I stumbled on the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences study. But my path is a data-driven path, and so when you ask the question, how does trauma show up in the social space, it shows up in disease, chronic condition disease rates, in the healthcare system. It shows up in readiness, ready to learn, kindergarten readiness rates. It shows up in third grade reading rates. It shows up in graduation rates. It shows up in our juvenile justice system, incarceration. And so in terms of how does trauma show up, I go, your comment that it is at the root of all things, so many of the challenges societally. And so I'll just leave it at that. I think it just shows up throughout our communities.
Thank you, Katie. We're gonna start back with you again, so keep your mic. Can you talk about 3 things that people can do to get help or to feel better in a social environment?
Yes, I've been thinking about this one a lot, especially some of the advice that's been given this morning, which is really good advice to advocate for yourself and take ownership of that. I think, I don't know if it's 3 things, but I'll stay away from that. I would like our communities to not require us to be such strong advocates. So, you know, what we're working with at Trace is to get our systems, our school systems, our healthcare systems, our justice systems, the community systems, everywhere we show up in our community. Ideally, there would be more awareness of how trauma is showing up in that system and how healing can show up. So things like the trauma-informed work that's happening, promoting that like crazy in each of those systems, so that when each of us shows up at school, at work, in our community, that it's not so toxic, and that it is healing, and we feel like we belong, and we feel seen, and so that when we need to then be an advocate, that's a welcome overture.
Great, thank you, Billy.
So 3 things, obviously there's a lot of things we can do here. I'm just gonna list them and we'll go into them a little bit. So number 1, like I talked about before, choose your food wisely, choose where you're at. Number 2 is and it's all mindfulness really, be super conscious about everything that you do. And then the last thing is gonna be, it depends, and I'll go into that one in a second. So the first thing is the food, and I mean, in my opinion, just choose organic food. It's just super easy, as much organic food, high quality food as you possibly can choose, because like I said before, and as other panelists will further explain, like trauma can create the lack of assimilation, which means even if you're eating really high quality food, you may not be able to assimilate those foods because you're kind of in this fight or flight mode. You're not in this like rest and digest mode, right? Like you're not gonna be running from a tiger and eating a banana at the same time. Well, maybe a banana, but you're not gonna be eating broccoli, right? So we want to make sure we're in the right mindset of where we're at. So like choosing that high quality food, and then obviously the second thing, and I guess the high quality food I should go into like organic as much as possible. Choosing an array of different colors. Eat the rainbow. The reason why that is important is because all of the colors have different like phytonutrients that are super important for our health and healing. So the more of that we can get and advocate for, the better we can have in stacking health in our favor, because that's really what we're doing here. Notice why we have like 6 people up here and not just 1 person, because the more we can do, the more we can stack our health in our favor towards the direction we want to go, because the world's chaotic out there. Let's just be real with ourselves, right? So the more tools that we have and knowledge that we have, which is why you guys have chosen on a Saturday, beautiful Saturday, to come here and learn about this stuff, is because of that, right? So you're stacking your knowledge in your favor. The second thing is just be really conscious. And that means like you are more powerful than you think, right? All the things that we're talking about here are tools that you can use. Ultimately, you have the full power to heal. Like you may not even need any of us. Like don't feel the need that like, you need us to get there. Like you can resolve this in yourself. You have that power, right? You are born, you're alive right now. So I just want to make sure that you guys know that like we're up here as advocates and resources, and only reason most of us are up here and passionate about it is because we've experienced all these traumas in our lives. And so I don't want you guys to feel like dependent, because I would feel like that quite often, where it's like, oh my God, like I need to see that person. And it's going to get into my third answer, and it's like, you don't really need to see it. Like maybe it'll help, but always reflect in with yourself and see, because your inner guidance system, your intuition, whatever you want to call it, is the most powerful thing that you have. And it will always guide you in the right direction if you let it and listen to it. And that's what these trauma people are virtually kind of trying to get you towards, so you can be your own advocate. And the last thing is it depends, meaning like I can sit up here and sound really good, but I may not be the person to help you, right? It just depends. Like, if anybody tells you like this is the path to health, right, run the other direction. Like if they don't have, and what I'm saying by that is they don't have multiple different avenues of like, okay, maybe it could be thought trauma, maybe it could be emotional trauma, maybe it could be nutrition trauma, maybe it's just a trauma inside yourself that you just need to come to terms with, right? If there's just not like multiple avenues, and it's only like, if I was up here saying like the only thing you need to do to be well is eat healthy, like that would be silly. I wouldn't listen to me if I said that. So that's what I mean by that. Just like it always depends on, everybody's situation is unique. stack your health in your favor, and provide your body with good quality food, air, and water.
Thank you.
So 3 things. First of all, accept responsibility that you need to embark on this path. If you really don't like the way your life's going, don't like the way you feel, don't like what's happening to you, you have to take responsibility for that. Second step is your mind is not your guide. Remember, trauma disconnects. So the very first thing I'd recommend everyone to do is to learn how to connect their mind to their heart, which Barbara demonstrated to you today, which is the foundation of much of the work I do. And then let your heart be your compass on this journey of healing. And listen to what your heart feels will help you. That's your guide. Because you can look for all these mental things mentally, but remember, part of trauma response is fear and guarding. And your mind will guard you from experiences that they think might be scary for you. And healing often can bring things in that you didn't really want to see or didn't really want to know, but you have to see them. You have to understand them. And when you see them from that perspective, when your mind's anchored in your heart, it's okay. Because your heart loves you. Your heart never judges you. Third thing is, on that journey, realize that other people help you and allow other people to help you. Don't be disconnected from them, but you can't hand them your responsibility. They can't give you a pill. They can't wave a magic wand, but they can do some things that are pretty darn magical when working with you to help you find your own healing and release. So take responsibility, let your heart be your guide, do your work.
Hank, you're the best. I know I said this earlier this morning, but I worked with Hank to do a series of energy healing, and again, that was one of my 3 was allowing myself to experience that emotional release. And like you say, it was work that you guided, but that ultimately was my responsibility for going there. And just, yeah, you're amazing. You're a gift. Yeah. It's no bias. But yeah. Am I making you blush? Sorry. So other kinds of healing that was helpful for emotional healing. For me personally, that was codependent recovery. Also known as people pleasing. I was very good at taking care of other people. I didn't know actually how to take care of myself, so I didn't know how to recognize my emotions, and then as such didn't know how to recognize needs when they came up, didn't know how to name those needs, but could cater to any other person and almost instinctively know what they needed and anticipate their needs and do a very good job of meeting those needs. So, but I didn't know how to do that for myself. So codependent recovery was really great for that. And then doing personal research and self-help. So I probably have an unfair advantage because I did end up getting a degree in therapy, and I found that process really healing, and then continued to learn through my clients and through their experiences and their sharing. But just continuing to be a student of life. So I have a book list here, but I don't necessarily have to share it all, but just doing that work and showing up for yourself in that way. And then, as I had shared earlier, I learned to meditate. I taught myself to meditate in 10th grade, and that has become a daily practice throughout my entire life. It's something that I do every single day, sometimes 2 and 3 times a day, and find that really helpful for connecting, like Hank said, to your heart. Because then when you're in that place of love, if that's your primary feeling, you can really take on anything. You can take that next step. Yeah. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you.
So 3 things from a mental health perspective. As a therapist, I'm a big advocate of counseling, and I think, as Billy said, try to find a therapist that works for you. Not every therapist is going to work for everybody. So really seeking that out and really doing the hard work of counseling. And I really I don't know if anybody's read the book Educated. It's a really great book of this woman overcoming adversity. And I love one thing that she says is not one therapy session was life-changing. Really, it is about going week after week, doing the hard work, and eventually healing over time, which I think we often live in a world where we want immediate gratification, and it's hard. We want to avoid any kind of distress, whether it's emotional, physical, spiritual. So doing the hard work, going week after week, and finding the right fit with a therapist that really works, I think is really important. And of course, I'm a really big advocate of EMDR. And so just asking if a therapist is trained in EMDR. Not every therapist is, but there's also several other modalities to help with trauma, but I'm a big proponent of EMDR. So that's one. Any mindfulness-based practice, I think, is really helpful, whether that's yoga, breathing, meditation, any alternative stuff as well. I mean, acupuncture, massage, dance, art, we know those things really help with trauma and help overcome trauma. So anything to help with that regulatory system, I think is really helpful. And then thirdly, I would say self-care. I always tell my clients kind of back to basics. Get back to what are you putting in your body? Are you exercising? Are you getting out and getting fresh air in nature? A huge proponent of social connection. It takes a village to raise us adults as well as children. So who are we connecting with? Who do we feel safe with to share our stories? And then purpose and meaning. I think a lot of people with trauma become very isolated, oftentimes feel disconnected, unemployed. In our culture, we put a lot of purpose and meaning on what we do. It doesn't necessarily have to be what we do. So finding that connection and purpose and meaning can be really powerful.
Right at the end, come on, everybody's already said everything. Now, let's see, on the physical level, the first thing I want to say is actually I have to stand up, and you probably can hear me because I can be really loud. Can you hear me? I think one thing physically is learn to shake it off. Right? My God, this is so easy. Huh? Shake it off. Right? Be able to be in your body, because a lot of times when we feel emotional or trauma, or we have an anxiety or something comes up, we freeze, right? And we just shut down, and we'd be like, okay, go to the bathroom, get in a stall, be like, oh, I hated that. Whew. Let it go, right? That's one thing physically I think that we can do anytime, anywhere, for the most part, and is to know that you can clear this stuff from your body right at the moment, like an emotion, you can let it go. So that's one thing. Also on a physical level is if you're having physical pain is to consider one level up. Maybe it's emotional, right? We always go to like, oh, I think something's wrong, I think something's wrong, I think something's wrong, I think something's wrong with my body. Probably nothing. Maybe it's emotional. And I'd say, like, you can go get it checked out, you got an MRI, everything's fine, whatever, right? But it's still there, go up a level. Think emotion. Just even consider thinking emotion when your body is feeling bad. Consider that. I think that's one thing, so consider it. Shake it off. Consider that emotions may be causing your physical pain. Right? Really get that in your mind. And the third thing I'd say is once you clue into this and you do your work, you take a responsibility, try to get off the meds when you can, as quick as you can, truly. Right? I do want to say one quick story because I think that it really exemplifies it. I worked with somebody, blessings on him, that was at the end of his rope, and he came in and he's like, I have this much money, how many sessions can I have? And that's how we did the work. And he started on 8 meds. He's a military guy, and he started on 8 meds. And by the time we did 1 year of work by dealing with the basement, the trauma in the basement, he was off all of his meds. And then he came in, and I'll tell you what he had, like antidepressants, he had an anti-anxiety, he had a sleep bed, he had a pain, he had opiates, he had muscle relaxers, right? Like this is what he had, because his body hurt, Right, yeah. And so then we cleared the basement. He went all the way down to nothing. And then he still felt a little off, and he came back and he used a small dose of tricyclic antidepressant, an old antidepressant, and he stabilized there, and he did great. So I'm not saying medicines aren't okay, but boy, he didn't need 8. He came down to 1, and it was perfect, right? And he cleared the basement, and he called me up 5 years later and said, hey, I'm still not angry. And I was like, oh, thank you, right? I'm so happy to hear that. So those are the things I would say to do.
Okay, so the third question was, what ways can the Central Oregon community help in this effort? Or what else would you like to add before we release it to the audience for questions? Just popcorn, whoever wants to go, just go.
Or Katie, are you really good at I actually wanted to read a quote that I forgot to read during my interview, and I want to read it on behalf of Traces because I really feel like that's the answer to the community question right now.
Elizabeth, can you? Yep.
Yes, that's the answer to the community question right now, and I just want to give Katie, I want to give you some love right now with this quote. Because I think this quote really exemplifies what we can do and what we are doing in our partnership. So I'm on the Traces Committee as well with Katie, and which is in part how we, in a windy way, ended up here today, which is beautiful. And what we're doing, not just in the state of Oregon and Central Oregon, but what's happening nationally with trauma-informed legislation. And so, because I think we're beginning finally to recognize through the ACEs study that trauma is a part of the human experience, and as Katie pointed out, it affects everything, all of our systems, right? All of our public services. We see it everywhere. We see it in the headlines. We see it in our bodies, in our minds, in our spirits, in our toxicity. And it's our attempt. It started because we became separated from love, and the process to heal is our return to love. And so there's this quote by Judith Herman. She's a researcher and author of a book called Trauma and Recovery. And it best expresses my hope not only for this conference, but for the ongoing work of the trauma-informed care movement. So she says, traumatic events destroy the sustaining bonds between individual and community. Those who have survived learned that their sense of self, of worth, of humanity depends on a feeling of connection with others. The solidarity of a group provides the strongest protection against terror and despair, and the strongest antidote to traumatic experience. Trauma isolates. The group recreates a sense of belonging. Trauma shames and stigmatizes. The group bears witness and affirms. Trauma degrades the victim. The group exalts her. Trauma dehumanizes. Love restores.
Awesome.
So that's what we're here to do.
Yeah. So again, popcorn, just anything that you'd like to.
Yeah, so the question, what can Central Oregon do? I just wanted to take a moment and say that, like, you guys are Central Oregon, and you guys vote, and you know how you vote with your dollars. So take your dollars and vote towards the things that you want to see more of, and take your dollars away from things you don't want to see more of, because that's literally the only way that it's going to happen. So every single one of you is Central Oregon, and like I said, it's empowering to have the fact that, like, everybody's business is basically, like, dependent on you. So taking that stance of, like, you are Central Oregon. What do you want to see more of? What would you like to see in your community? And then, as leaders, we can create those situations, and then it's everybody's job to vote on those things if they want to see more of them, which is, I think, why everybody's here at the trauma conference, because everybody wants to have that new level of enlightenment, responsibility, and power for themselves. So.
Anybody else want to add to it? Katie?
trying to formulate this. So the systems question, what can our community do? And I think that it goes back to the answer earlier, is we can become trauma informed. So the systems, and the relevance to this group is we're all part of systems. You know, we're either connected to a school, we're connected to a faith community, we're connected to our political system, we're connected to systems, we're connected to our neighborhoods. And so each of us can play a role in kind of understanding trauma, sharing what we know about trauma and how it is showing up, because it's so hidden. And so shining a light on it and say, this is trauma, this is trauma, this is trauma, and shining a light on the solutions. I mean, just hearing people repeatedly point to the types of healings that are working and that our systems, our insurance systems, are not paying for, as one example, is a big deal. Our schools right now throughout Central Oregon are doing a massive transformation in culture of care. So our students we're asking our students about their own resilience so that we can understand how our school systems and structures and relationships are supporting them. So supporting that and talking about that work. We're training teachers in what it means to have a trauma-informed school, classroom tactics, systems and administration policies and practices. So we'll be learning throughout Central Oregon massively. I would love to see our government systems start thinking about this, just in terms of simple things like the Ways and Means. Our Oregon legislature, Ways and Means, came to town and they were at the fairgrounds. And there's this line of, like this, right? A line of legislators, and you get to come and you give your 3-minute testimony. And there's a gavel pounding, and any emotion that's shared in the audience is diminished when it could be more welcome. Like, that's great. The noise let's keep the noise down and, show your support like this, but instead it was a gavel pounding. And so just the stress of trying to give public testimony and advocate and share your vote, in addition to your financial power. But I mean, there's just lots of policies, practices, and systems, and I think each of us can start paying attention to what's happening in those and advocating there.
Because Katie, I have a question for you. Did you say that you were at the elementary school level the other day doing the ACEs scoring? Is that?
We're not the ACEs scoring, so we don't do the trauma assessment. We do resilience, understanding, like, where is the resilience and where are we? And the other important thing about resilience, we're looking at it from an individual, like what we all bring with us, but also the relational and the community experience. And so what we're trying to understand is how the relationships around our kiddos and the experiences, the school environment or the community environment around our kiddos is either lifting them up or keeping them down. So the same question, it can be addressed in our communities.
Yeah, because I think we need to reach them at a younger level, kindergarten, first grade on up. Because it is my understanding right now that in Oregon, there's only counselors at the junior high and high school level. They are not available in the elementary school level. I, for one, would like to get on board with that.
Actually, I can speak to that because I supervise the school-based clinicians. And so we do have clinicians co-located in Lapine, Bend, and Redmond, actually. Yes, we do. So it's limited, but we work in partnership with our medical sponsors, and they have trained behavioral health consultants who then can refer on to behavioral health specialists. We certainly don't have enough, but at the state level, that's part of my job, is advocating every 2 years for that grant funding to be expanded in terms of getting more clinicians in, and then working on some youth partnership committees through Traces and through the county that we are constantly looking at. And what it boils down to is funding. It's not, we're all saying, yes, we want more mental health and working together. It's just, it's like Billy said, your vote counts. And so what are we voting for? And certainly, and I don't think it's just having clinicians embedded. I think with Traces, it's really about empowering community at every level. So from the individual, me as a person in the community, all the way to, those systems of care, and having each of those levels understand to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma and how to respond. so that we're not punishing people, we're healing them, we're restoring them. So yeah.
We've been mentioning Trauma Informed Oregon. They are having their conference October 16th, 17th, and 18th in Sun River. That is posted on our Facebook page, so I would look into that if you guys would like. And you know, because they're connecting community with resources. It sounds like that's their theme this year. So in fact, I invited some of our presenters to possibly help with that. So look for that. Okay. Does anybody else have anything that they wanted to say before I open it up to the question?
I think with trauma, we all have our stories. I think the more that we can break down the stigma and the more that we can really be open in a safe way and with safe people, sharing our trauma, talking about it, really breaking down the stigma. I think being in Central Oregon for the last 5 years, I think Central Oregon is an amazing community that really works really well together across all different kind of modalities. And I think there's a lot of work that's actually being done already to do some of these things. So one of our work groups that I'm on, it's the Behavioral Health Identification Awareness Work Group. It's a long name, but it's a RIP work group, and it's working on some of those things, breaking down the barriers to people getting into mental health care. We have hired a consultant to come on who's going to help us to bridge a gap between primary care and behavioral health providers in the community, integrating behavioral health specialists into clinics, to school-based healthcare systems. If anybody is on social media and wants to go, we've started a campaign. It's called Mind Your Mind. It's a campaign that you can like them on Facebook, go check them out. It's going to talk about, in a community-oriented way, how do we break down some of those stigmas, resources to go get help. If anybody needs to know anything, resources about how do you seek out mental health providers. There's a Suicide Prevention Alliance group that I'm a part of also. We built a website. It's preventsuicideco.org. You can go on and you can look at mental health providers and what insurances they take, what insurances they don't take, what they specialize in, what they don't specialize in as a resource. Or you can call your insurance and ask who's in your network and get that list narrowed down from there. So I think Central Oregon is an amazing place that we're doing things like this from a grassroots standpoint of really coming together as a community, because I'm a big believer it takes every one of us. It's not just the mental health professional's role in trauma or mental health, it's all of us. It's the same thing with zero suicide. Everybody plays a role and we all play a part. And so I think don't underestimate your role.
So just to go back to that, so the resource center, I think you'll find a lot of great resources there. So once we're done here, that's where you guys will be heading, is to that, to the cafeteria resource center where you'll get to eat your lunch. So anyway, are there actually questions from the audience that would, because I have just a couple of questions here, but if someone has, right here, can you speak loud, or can someone, hold on? No, yeah, why don't I, she's got a mic, our lovely assistant.
Just love Hank and Elizabeth, the idea that love conquers all, like Robin Hood at the end where Friar Tuck's there, love conquers all. I love that, and yet I'm personally aware and see this every day, where when you're beaten down socially, nutritionally, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically, change takes a lot of energy, even good change, and so you can't pick yourself up by your bootstraps and just do the work that you need to do, especially if nutritionally. Your brain's not working and your body's not working and all of that. And so is Traces, or is there, I can just think of a dozen people that I invited to be here with me today that really would have benefited so deeply, but they're at that place where they can't even cross over the parking lot to get in where they need to be. And so as a immediate place to be able to plug someone into or make a recommendation or drive them to a place where they can begin to have a conversation. Is Traces that, or would we see that in the resource center?
I can speak to how Traces could be. I suspect there's many. One of the things we do, the breakout sessions this afternoon, the Traces 101 Part 1, is designed to create a community conversation for any audience. So we often reach people who are kind of what you described, who aren't really thinking about this. Either they have personally experienced trauma and they're not, their body isn't ready for this work, or they don't have a lot of trauma and they don't recognize how it's showing up in our communities. And so oftentimes that really brief, kind of fairly light intro will say, I need to be thinking about this. And then we do have a learning community that's ongoing, where we put information out there, we connect people to trainings, we connect people to resources, we get together on a regular basis. So Traces can be that place, but I suspect there's lots of other.
It's an interesting question because we actually piloted this year in our school-based health centers a social emotional health curriculum. And I think one of the things that's missing from our social structure is, where do I learn how to tend to my feelings? Like, we do have a place, like, I don't have to be a dentist to know how to take care of my teeth, but I didn't know what to do with my trauma. And I went, into the field in part to figure out, like, what do I do with this? And so I think it's a great question, and I think that, yes, organizations like Traces are part of that, of looking at, when we were early in our strategic planning and looking at kind of that logic model of how do we empower the individual, the workplace, the community, the state, or the region, with that information. And so now in our school-based health centers, like I said, we're piloting a social emotional health curriculum to do just that, so that it becomes a part of the fabric of our culture of like, oh, I know what to do. I know how to respond when my friend tells me that they're depressed, or when I've experienced something myself that's really scary. But for right now, it's still this kind of hidden, shameful thing that we don't talk about. Just in the last couple of generations, I think it's become, thankfully, a little more normalized to say. Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, exactly.
Can I just add one quick thing to that too? I think it is also, if any of us think about our own path towards healing and really reflect on it, it's kind of that compilation of moments where we feel seen, right? And so any of us can do that for each other, right? So and not asking for anything in return. We're not trying to fix you. We're not trying to get you into therapy. We're not trying to do that. We're just seeing and being, and that is healing, and that's the love, right? And that, as that builds up, then.
Katie, that's perfect. That they just need to feel. You just let them know that they're seen. I
We can all do that.
Seen and heard, right?
Could I add one more thing? I would just say, you're being here and you're a beacon of light, you're going to reflect that to people around you. So just you asking these questions and, like she said, being there for your friends, I think that's just as transformational as anything. Just, because at some point, when you find a new journey, something sparked your interest, and maybe you're that interest for that spark for that person, right? Like, what is she doing that my life is lacking this energy, or what is she doing that my life is lacking this connection or purpose or meaning, right? So I think it's really empowering that all you guys are here, and thank you guys for being here for that purpose. Thank you.
So you guys could be out, like you're saying, beacon of hope, or, but the other thing is, this is being recorded, so that'll be on our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, just our website. The other thing is, most of our presenters are also going to try to record their presentations, so just anyone that couldn't be here, just refer them to those sites. Also, you're more than welcome to take an extra program/directory. There's resources in there. So these are some of the things you can do for the people that couldn't be here, just, yeah. Okay, anybody else that's out there? Oh, got another person out there. I think it's ready to go. You don't even have to turn it on. Yeah.
I know, I'm just thinking and centering myself. I guess I had a question of any recommendation you can offer me. I'm living kind of an alternative lifestyle, and basically the last 2 therapists I went to, I stopped seeing because I explained kind of my philosophy of how my psychology is working, and they kind of felt like they couldn't help me. And I'm starting to maybe figure out a way of how to ask the right questions to maybe try to find the correct therapist that can actually work with me. But me personally, like, I have come to see my depression, my anxiety, my rage. I have a lot of suppressed rage that I need to go to. Every time I think about my rage, I think about a primal screaming. That I need to find a primal screaming place because I need to like let out so much rage.
I think I know somebody that's creating one of those, so come see me after.
Oh, for sure. So I've seen these things as my teacher, and when I'm depressed, I just like allow myself to be depressed, and then the lessons come through. And when I'm anxious, I see it as I'm in an unnatural place that is allowing me not to feel comfortable. And I've learned that I started to feel that there's nothing wrong with me in my anxiety. What's wrong is what I call this toxic soup that I'm swimming in, and the social, the ideology that I'm surrounded by, the privilege, it just has many layers. So yeah, I've stopped seeing myself as the person that has something wrong with them. What's wrong is the toxic soup that I'm swimming in. So when I go to therapists, the last two specifically that I went to, they were like, I don't know how to help you. And so, with that kind of mentality, like, how can I pursue therapy? Or, I think I'm starting to figure out like how to ask the right questions, like I said, but what kind of therapist should I like try to look for if you think you can provide some assistance with that? Thank you.
Both of you can answer.
Again, I think if you're not feeling comfortable, you're not feeling safe, you're not feeling a connection, I think listen to that. And it may take many therapists until you find the right therapist that's going to be a good fit for you. I think you're doing great work. I think you're listening to yourself, you're advocating for your needs, and then maybe it's more than just a therapist. Maybe it's some healing, other, different healing work as well on top of that. But I think just trust that gut instinct, trust yourself in knowing that if it doesn't feel like a good fit, it's not a good fit. It may not mean that they're not a great therapist. It means they're just not a good therapist for you. So.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, first of all, thank you for sharing. That was very brave.
So brave,
And,
yeah.
That we are not always going to, therapy should not ever help us get to a place where we are tolerating intolerance, if that makes sense. And so that's not the goal of therapy. The goal of therapy is to find a way to, return to love and love ourselves. And so, yeah, if you're not finding a fit, one great way to look for and search for a clinician is to go on Psychology Today and type in your zip code, and you will get to see a photo of the clinician, their name, address, and then kind of the areas of expertise and their philosophy, their background, what they charge. It's a really great way to research, and because we live in such kind of a rural area, our pool can be really limited, and so this would allow you to maybe search outside of where you live and see, are there other clinicians that maybe are speaking your language, right, in their descriptions of themselves, and see if they do phone therapy or video therapy. That's something that's becoming more and more validated nationally, which is great, and so that's always a good alternative if you're not finding a fit here. And then just like Sierra said, continue to do your own kind of personal work, right? Yeah.
Could I add to that really quick? We've got some amazing, going back to resources. Mark Montgomery is the owner of Bend Healing Community. He's doing some fantastic work there. So that's in our resource directory. That'll be in there. Also, Cheryl and I run Bend Wellness Community, which is a meetup. So one thing we keep talking about, love, like surround yourself with like-minded individuals, surround yourself with people that accept you and love you for who you are. I think we've tried to create that in our meetup. But there's some amazing things. Rising Consciousness Center, Maya and Shiv are going to be creating some amazing things at their beautiful home, and So there are things you can do out in the community to surround yourself with, people that love you, understand, and try to, so yeah. Can I read these two questions? Because it's about 20 or quarter to 12 right now. We want to,
Suzanne, could I just,
Oh,
30
absolutely.
seconds?
Absolutely.
This isn't directly addressed to you, but you kind of reminded me, and the first question I didn't address this, that like all of our representations here can all present basically in the same manner. So like I just wanted to throw this in there that like nutritional imbalances, toxic imbalances can just as easily represent anxiety and depression as a mental health imbalance. So like maybe for yourself, just finding like sometimes we think, oh, it's anxiety, like it has to be a psychologist, right? Like it doesn't always have to be, and maybe that's, obviously it's got to be some part of it, but maybe that's not the easiest first step for you. So it's all finding like what's the easiest first step that I can take towards making myself better. And if it's just like eating a little bit of organic food, or maybe it is thinking a little bit better, or maybe it's, going out for walks or a little bit of exercise or whatever it is for you, that's what's important, right? And I heard you say something, and I just want to say like, you always want to kind of circle everything back towards yourself, like blaming other things, like, yeah, I talk about this toxic society, but like it's my body's ability to take responsibility and handle those toxins that I'm looking to change. So whenever I look towards helping myself, it's always a reflection of like, what's the best thing I can take for myself? So that empowerment in yourself is gonna like, once you align yourself, it doesn't matter what's going on outside. It won't matter who's entitled. You don't need to look for other people. You don't need to get pissed off at other people. You don't need to think about other things like that. You can show love towards that and still be an anchor in yourself. So.
Because sometimes it can be as simple as a vitamin D deficiency as well. So vitamin D, getting out some sunshine, hopefully, but a vitamin D supplement, that's supposed to help with, I believe, doctor, anxiety and depression. Okay, I'm going to cover these, ask these two, and whoever would like to chime in. How would you utilize your specialty to serve our veterans, military, and or first responders? So based on your area or whatever.
So one of the things that I'm doing right now is, or have been doing, is for the last 3 years, in conjunction with the sanctuary implementation through the county, is creating trainings specifically for public servants, and most recently that has included Ben PD, and so I'm working right now in a partnership through the student threat assessment team, which I'm also on, is kind of branching out into our first responders and connecting with like our 911
Don't forget those
folks
firefighters.
yeah, firefighters, absolutely, because we know, super high rates of suicide, super high rates of trauma for that workforce, and they're going to be the last ones to ask for help because they're the first ones that we go to when we need help. And so, so reaching that group, I mean, I've worked in the schools and I've worked in all different, the recovery community has been really welcoming, but I think, yeah, there's a real difficulty when you're the first person that everyone goes to when they need help, to actually ask for and receive that help. And so we are working really hard now to reach those groups and get some training out to them. Yeah.
Does anybody else want to add to that as far as?
Give a short answer. That one is we see you, and we are at Traces. We'll never kind of insert ourselves into work. It's more if there's an interest, join the movement, right? Join the partnership. We have worked with one local agency and looked around the country to see what kinds of programming or policies and things that were happening in that industry. So we have that at the ready for any agency that is interested. I know like Airlink is a Traces partner and very actively thinking about how this manifests in their world. But anyway, available, but also we're not going to push. So if anybody has a door, we see the need.
Anybody else? Hank.
So for me, there are some very simple tools that are easy to teach to people so that they learn how to deal with these intense things that happen in those kinds of jobs in a way that prevents themselves from absorbing or keeping trauma around that in the first place. But it's already happened, so they also need help how to recover from that. But I think it'd be good to do some proactive training, which some of these heart-based tools are all about. How to stay anchored in your heart, how to process that emotion, how to let it go, how to not take it on as your personal responsibility. Those kinds of things, they're quite easy to learn and they're quite easy to implement. And I've seen them implemented in these kinds of workforce and in hospitals, like in the ER teams. And it's literally a 1 hour teaching, 1 hour workshop, so that you can equip them with those. I'd be happy to help with that.
And then, because Hank, are you doing things yourself? Because you've got like a training program or something for people to attend various classes or workshops.
I do.
And you're in our directory as well.
So I do teach workshops to people. A good friend of mine, also by the name of Bree Hibbs, teaches at COCC about heart coherence, a 4-hour workshop. The workshops I teach are both how to prevent yourself from being further traumatized, but also how to clear yourself in all 4 of the realms: heart, body, mind, and soul. And so it's for people who want to learn to help themselves, and for those who want to help others. So it's about 14 hours of training, and it's a certification workshop for that. I'm teaching one on June 8th and 9th, and I like to keep the teaching small, but I'll be, you can check my website for when we teach those classes, because it takes a village to heal a village.
Again, he is in our directory, but it's Blue Heron Rising. Okay. So I'm going to answer this question, then if anyone else has anything else they wanted to ask. But how can you heal multiple layers of trauma? Where do you start, and how do you?
One at a time.
Yeah, one at a time. Yeah.
Yeah. What's that?
Pretty much.
Yeah, one at a time. It takes a lifetime, right? And so I think what Billy said actually is to start where you can, right? Is to just begin with what makes sense. I mean, there were times in my own healing where I had to work. I didn't have the resources. I wasn't in a place where there were clinicians, and so the best I could do for myself every day was to, get washed, get dressed, and make sure that I ate. And sometimes that's all we can do. And if we're able to do that and that's enough, that has to be enough, right? And then as opportunity presents itself, you were saying your friends are just in a place right now where they're too tired. And just being alive is the work, right? Like, that's enough. But when we get to a place where we find a little bit of energy, pick the thing that you feel drawn to deal with. And then other times, our body sometimes I think is the one that says, hey, time out, right? Like, that was the case for you. It sounds like for you, and for you, Barb, that was also for me. At different points, my body said, time out. You got to deal with this, and I don't want to. Well, the alternative isn't great, right? Like, you won't be here if you don't deal with it. So sometimes it gets to be our choice, and sometimes the choice gets made for us. But yeah, one at a time. Yeah.
So one thing about trauma is, I call them trauma patterns. They're diverse, and there are many of them. And so if you start looking at those trauma patterns, like I work with people who have cancer, it's a symptom. It's not the problem. If you start looking at them, where do they point? If you can begin to realize that the trauma that you've experienced is at the root of many symptoms, and it can seem overwhelming if you think you have to go work on every symptom. You do not. So if you go, like, to any plant, you go to the root of it, you can take down the whole plant if you work on the root. And so the practices that I teach is, it's a bit like a layer cake, but there's not 1,000 layers. I have many people who go through 1, series of work on this, and they're done. 90% of their patterns are gone with it. So it's where do you put your focus and where do you put your understanding. So always go to the root if you can. It's not that the symptoms aren't serious and they're not troublesome and they can be fatal, but if you work on the symptom, you're really not working on the root, and you may trim off one branch from that tree, that trauma tree, but that tree's still there and it's still healthy, and you're going to have more things to deal with. So always try to keep it really simple. Go to the root, find the root, go to the root, fix the root. Everything else goes with it.
That's good. Yeah.
I think, just want to piggyback on that. Hank and I often work together. But is that I find I do energy work, so I do deep emotional release work for people with their bodies. And what I notice often is that also in the same sense of going to the root, if you think of each time something happens, it's a river, like the energy is flowing through your body, it's a river, it starts to freeze. A little edge, you had a little trauma and you froze that froze, and then the next layer layered on and on and on and on. And you can work on this edge, but if you actually go to the bank in the deep root, the childhood space, and you get down to there when you first did the freeze, when you first started to feel disempowered, you can unfreeze that and you can calm down that hyper alert nervous system. And all of a sudden you feel calm for the first time, and sometimes the whole thing will slough. It's like a string of pearls. You get to it and it's like, bloop, these are all the things, every layer that was on the same issue that got frozen. You get to that base issue like, wow, this is it when I was 3 or whatever. Whew, the whole thing sometimes sloughs, and you can go really fast with some of those things. So I'll just piggyback with that.
I think that keep in mind that I don't think there's any point in time when we're healed. I think people get this idea that, okay, I will be good when, or I will be healed when. This is a lifelong process and a lifestyle and of healing. I think it will continue through our entire life.
Because traumas are going to still come, unfortunately.
I just want to piggyback and kind of like that they use in the functional medicine model. It's called a functional medicine timeline. So for yourself, if we're talking about this trauma, you can kind of just like map it out and just write down like, when I was 14, this happened, 10, this happened, and then just look at your whole timeline and be honest with yourself because you're the only one looking at it, and then be like, okay, like where do I think like, this is really my most impactful thing? And then like you seeing your own timeline can kind of give you a description all the way from pre-birth, because your mom's health has a lot to do with your birth has a lot to do with your health, so you can look at the entire thing from before you were born, right? And then you can kind of like pinpoint, okay, like what would maybe be something that would be pretty impactful that I could conquer right now. So taking an empowered viewpoint on that, and then also like, and most people here are either dealing with some trauma or have done with trauma or have somebody that have trauma. And I can tell you that like trauma creates superpowers. So if you're in a trauma situation right now, it's because you're being called to a higher purpose and you just haven't found it yet, right? And so like you can't have an extreme darkness without eventually getting to an extreme lightness of a yin and yang situation. So all of us up here have dealt with something really down deep that has propelled us in such a different direction that now we have superpower. So all of you here have that superpower, you just haven't discovered it yet. Or maybe you have. And then the last thing I want to do just quick, I know ladies and women, you guys are amazing for being here because you're so connected, but for all the guys in the audience, good job for being here.
Yay, yay, male
there are
energy.
oftentimes like ladies are intuitive and you guys are the beacons and you guide your family there, and it's always the husbands that are like the last person like, I don't want to do that crap. And like, so for every guy that's here, thank you for being here and being a part of this as well. Thank you.
Okay, how about a thank you for the panel?